But this is a little different, because in
It's a little
the
different
red one, you're telling them the answer, right?
Yep, we're adding an instructor explanation. So there's two variations being shown here. One
Okay.
is the addition of the instructor explanation, and the
Because
second
before,
is,
they didn't see the
That's
answer
right.
until after Q2.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? They're still not seeing the distribution of the answers, actually. We're just discussing them. And then I ask them the second question, discuss it, then I show them distributions, then we go on. And then they get this question later.
Can
So,
I ask for a little bit of clarification there? So that first instructor discusses answers. Is it a discussion that includes which one is the correct answer, or is it just a discussion of all of the answers?
no, it is a discussion that includes the correct answer.
Okay.
Yeah. So, since this is my class, I can tell you exactly how I do it. Usually I would say, well, I can see from your answers that you guys are split on what you think is correct. Why doesn't someone tell me what they thought about this answer? So I just ask for student input. And then after I hear some student input and some students ask some questions, then I clarify which one is actually the correct answer.
Okay.
And if there needs to be additional explanation on top of what the students say, then I might say something additional. But mostly I'm asking them to tell me what their reasonings were. And we often have a productive discussion about one of the incorrect answers and why it was attractive. So it is relatively, it can be a very productive time in the class because there's a lot of discussion of how do we think about this question.
Yeah.
Okay. So first I want to just show you this without the retention stuff so that you can see how the non-majors look different. And what happens when you add this instructor component. So before I show you that, I should tell you that I already know that the non-majors are different from the majors. I've already done a fairly extensive study that demonstrated that the non-majors, although they start off the class with about the same pre-test scores on the genetics concept assessment as do the majors, they don't make as large of a learning gain as the majors do. So, and we believe that this is due to a couple of factors. One is that they don't study, hardly at all, compared to the amount of time that the majors put into the class. And the other is that they're also not as motivated or interested. So they do report relatively high motivation and interest levels, but it's significantly lower than the majors. So there are differences between these two populations of students. However, we thought it was a nice opportunity to ask very similar questions. Since it's a genetics class, we cover very similar topics in the two courses. The non-majors course is just a little bit less detailed. Okay, so the non-majors are not as good as the majors at applying what they're learning. And again, this doesn't surprise me, but I just like to share the data with you. So on average, over 14 question series of isomorphic questions with about 60 students. There are actually 67 students in the class, but because of participation, they're not always all there. We have about a 50% average correct on Q1, so very similar to the previous data. And then for Q1AD, they actually do very well, large increase, 70-ish%. But then they go down a little bit. I'd like to point out that they don't go down back to Q1. So although they don't stay up or go up higher like the majors did in their series of questions, they still make a significant learning gain. So this to that is 41%. So they're still, over these 14 series of questions, they're still learning. They're still demonstrating learning, but it's not as impressive as it was for the majors. And I'd also like to point out that this is even with the addition of an instructor explanation.
Or maybe because of.
You might hope that they would have really shot up here because they had the benefit of an instructor explanation.
Sorry.
Maybe that would really help.
You guys are all laughing, but I'm not sure it's a joke.
Right.
So you learn very quickly what the game in the classroom is, and the game in the classroom is we're asked a question, and then we're told the answer and the explanation. So I can sort of relax a little bit. My discussion with my peers is not that important because I don't really care what my peers have to say. I'm going to learn from the authority, what the correct answer is. So it's not, to me, so obvious that this is a surprise or a joke.
It's also worth pointing out it's not very many standard deviations from the purple to the yellow.
Yeah,
So,
right. Yeah, I didn't actually test whether these two numbers
Yeah,
are
that's
different.
Not any.
I know that this is
They
different
overlap,
here
so-
to here,
They're probably
but
not.
these are probably not. Yeah. Okay, so I will address actually what Steve just said because it's an important component. So I'm going to show you the tree again that separates out how students are doing based on their initial answers to Q1. So if you look over here, it's similar as before. About 53% of the students are getting it correct to start with. Those students go on to, 95% of them, to go on to answer Q1 AD correctly. Over here, these students are actually doing very well. A lot of them are actually answering Q1 AD correctly, even though they got Q1 incorrect. But then what happens next is quite fascinating to me. I think that maybe the students over here are a little bit lazy, maybe. Because what happens is that they don't actually maintain that high degree of getting Q1 correct. So they're presented with a new question, and they aren't able to apply it to the level we would hope that they could. So they clearly didn't all know how to think about it back here, because only 75% of these students get it right. And look over here, these students have the same chance of getting it right. So what's the obvious difference between this one and the last one? The instructor was discussing the answer. So this may have really helped these students over here, but clearly didn't help these students over here. They think they already know the answer. They may not be thinking about it very hard when they go on to answer the second question. These students are like, I'm not sure, I think I got it correct, but I've got to listen to this answer. And when they do, they can progress. So there seems to be an impact of the instructor explanation. It levels the playing field such that even people who got it incorrect, Q1 AD, have the same chance of going on to answer Q2 correctly. So I think this suggests that the instructor explanation is very helpful for this arm of the students. The students who are unsure are being helped by the combination, potentially, of the peer discussion and the instructor explanation. And the reason I think that it is still important to have the peer discussion is for the following reason. Is this okay? Any questions? Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. They are the same. I was not expecting that. So, you know, the obvious question is, well, is it still useful to have the peer discussion? If that instructor explanation levels the playing field like that, should I take the time to actually let my students talk about the question, or should I just tell them the answer? And, of course, I don't really want to just tell them the answer, but I'd like my data to suggest that there's value in letting them discuss it. So I did actually have 9 sets of questions, not quite as many, but 9 sets of questions where I didn't let them talk to each other. So I set this up this way to start with. I wanted to compare these two groups. I ended up having fewer sets of questions here than I wanted, but I still think I can tell you something about it because the numbers look really different. So, first of all, these questions overall had a higher average. Yeah.
When you say 9 additional sets, you mean there were 18 questions or 9?
Nope. There were 14 questions that were presented with the Q1 discussion, Q1 AD, Q2, and then 9 series of questions
So
that involved Q1, Q2, right? So the same protocol, but they did not have any peer discussion. They only had instructor explanation between Q1 and Q2. Okay. So these questions were a little bit easier maybe because the percent correct over these 9 questions was higher. Students who got it correct went on to answer it at 80% level correctly after the instructor explanation. But these students over here did not have as much success answering question 2. Only 60% of them were able to answer correctly. This number here is significantly different from that number. So for the people who are not sure about the answer to Q1, they are not doing as well just hearing the instructor explanation as
As well.
they did before.
Wasn't
What was
that
the number before?
75
It was
before?
75%.